Good morning, everyone.
In unison, good morning.
In unison, good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Mr. Sanger?
Thank you, Your Honor. Could we please have the document screen again, please? There we go. All right. With the court's permission, we'll resume with Exhibit 334. And the court may recall this is a series of a couple hundred documents and they have the Bates stamp number on the bottom, so we'll be referring to those by the MJ003 digit number, sometimes 4-digit number. Is that all right, Your Honor?
You may do so.
Thank you. And in that regard, Mr. Barron, or Officer Barron, we had gotten to this period of time, just before we stopped yesterday, where the gate log showed from 2 to 17 to 2 to 20. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And that was not the usual mode of recording. Usually it was day by day. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright, so I'm going to show you 149 here again. Even though we had gotten up to 2 to 20, I want to go back to that period for a couple of other entries, alright? So just to remind us where we were, I have MJ00149 up on the board. And that is the one that said 2 to 17 through February 20th, 03, correct?
Correct.
And at the top, that had the extensive list of guests and where they were staying, correct?
Correct.
And then it shows CO, so it's carryover for the Arvizo family, and then it has times out, but those times out are not necessarily coordinated with a particular day. Is that correct?
Correct.
Alright, now, I'm going to refer to 00152 and put that up on the board, if I may. Shows, at the bottom, 152. Do we have our laser pointer, by any chance? If you have it, 152. And then up at the top there's an entry that I'm going to push the wrong button. I'm sorry. There we go. Sorry. I'm going to push that button. See if you can read that entry. Do you have it there?
No, somebody took it out.
Alright, that's alright. Are you able to read the top entry there after I stop moving it? Just a second. There we go. Can you read that entry?
At 3:05?
Yes. Would you like to have another copy up there?
I believe it says Marie Nicole, Danielle, Aldo are staying upstairs theater.
Okay, and this particular gate log is dated February 18th, 03, correct?
Correct.
Now, what would be the purpose of that particular entry? Do you know?
So we would know where they were.
So that would be a reference to where those particular guests were staying on that particular day. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So as of 3:05, those guests had decided to stay in the upstairs theater, correct?
Correct.
Alright, we'll skip ahead, then, to. I don't want to get this out of order. We'll skip ahead to 155. Now, I'm going to show you 155. And I'll try to speak up when I come back here. If anybody can't hear, raise a hand so the court and bailiff know. That's for February 19th, 03, correct?
Correct.
And on this, I want to direct your attention to the top part of this one. It appears to indicate Hamid, a photographer.
Yes.
Okay, and by the way, there's a column that says, CONF. What does that mean?
Confidentiality, if they need to sign one or not.
So a person who has been there doesn't have to sign that agreement each time they come in, correct?
Correct.
And the agreement basically says, I'm not going to disclose private things about Mr. Jackson's residence, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and it shows that Hamid and apparently a couple other people, a Mark Adams and a Ray Dominguez, arrived at 1620 hours, is that correct? 4:20 in the afternoon?
Yes.
And departed at 2010 hours, which would be 8:10 in the evening, correct?
Yes.
Now, let me ask you, did you have a chance to review these logs since you testified yesterday?
No.
Alright, I'm going to show you now 157. And I think this was really the last one that we put up yesterday. And this shows, let me back this up a little bit. 00157 is for February 20th, 03, correct?
Correct.
And this one shows that the Arvizos returned to the property at 1420 hours, or 2:20 in the afternoon, on the 20th of February, 2003, correct?
Yes.
And it also shows that Asha Pryor and something Tucker, that's cut off there, returned at the same time?
Yes.
So it indicated all those people came to the gate at the same minute, correct?
Yes.
And generally that would indicate they came in the same vehicle?
Generally, yes, it would.
Alright, now, if we go to the next page, which would be 00158, which I'll put up, that shows 158 at the bottom. If we look at the top, that's also for February 20th 03, correct?
Yes.
And you indicated there usually are 3 pages per day, is that right?
Generally, yes.
Generally. So this is just another page for that same day?
If it's dated the same day, then yes.
Yeah, and what I would like to do is direct your attention to, see if I can get it in there so you can still read it. If you look at the entrance for 1420.
Yes.
That's the same time that was indicated on the preceding page that the Arvizos, Asha Pryor, and Destin Tucker arrive. Is that correct?
Yes.
And here the entry indicates Jesus S, so let's start with that. That would be Jesus Solis, is that correct?
Correct.
Jesus Solis cleared Asha Pryor, Dustin Tucker, Gavin Arvizo, Star Arvizo, Devellin Arvizo to come in, correct?
Correct.
And the purpose of that entry is what? That type of entry.
That type of entry is generally for, first of all, whomever's at the gate to know to let someone in if they don't have prior, if we haven't been given a list of somebody who's coming in that day, and then to let the oncoming shift know that they're there.
So that would be further evidence in these logs that all of those people just mentioned, Pryor, Tucker, and 3 Arvizos, came back to the ranch at 1420 hours on February the 20th, correct?
Correct.
Oh, I'm sorry, there was one other thing on that. It also looks like Shane Brando ran over somebody's foot with a cart, is that true, at about 1815 hours?
If that's what it says, I'm assuming it's true.
And then 1924, it looks like Shane Brando hit Gavin Arvizo with a cart?
Yes.
And then the cart was taken away, all right?
Yes.
Okay, so, again, somebody in security or somebody on the staff, when they saw that there was a safety issue, exercised supervision over guests on the ranch. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it shows Gavin as code 4, right?
Yes.
And then it says, received EMT care from, what does that say, K10 and K13?
No, it's R10 and R13.
R10 and R13, are those designations for people that worked on the ranch?
R is Robert, it's a call sign over the radio, so we're not using each other's name.
So whoever it was who responded from the fire department came down to give him some sort of emergency care to make sure he's okay, is that right?
Yes. Robert 10 gave the care. Robert 13 wrote it down.
There you go. When it says, Gavin, code 4 means no further assistance required, okay.
Yeah, he's okay.
If you say, in police talk basically, code 4, you mean no further assistance, everything's okay?
Correct.
Alright, good. We're going to skip ahead here to 160. I'm putting up 160. Now, that's for February 21st 03, is that correct?
Yes.
And at the bottom, it shows, Vincent Black, yes, 22. I think that says, 55, 2255, correct?
Yes.
So that would indicate, even though it's written on the bottom, it would indicate, sir, that Vincent Black arrived, had to sign an agreement, right?
Yes.
And that he arrived at 2255 hours, correct?
Pull the paper down a little more.
Certainly. Would you like to look at would it be easier to look at a full sheet?
Yes, my eyes haven't adjusted from yesterday yet.
Alright, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Excuse me, does anybody want to see this? I'm just going to show him my copy.
Go ahead.
Mr. Black did need to sign a confidentiality, and he was checked in at 2255. It's on the bottom, because there's no more room for guests here.
Alright, so, the fact that it's put in the margin is of no significance other than the fact you ran out of room on the form, right?
Yes, and the officer didn't want to start a new sheet.
For ecological reasons, I assume?
Sure.
It says, CO, next to the 2255, so that means Mr. Black checked in at 10:55 at night. He came through the gate at 10:55 at night, and then he stayed to the next day, correct?
Correct.
And below it, it says Janet Arvizo, correct?
Correct.
That tends to indicate that Janet Arvizo came in at 2,255 hours as well, is that correct?
Yes.
And she was not required to sign a confidentiality agreement?
No.
And then she also stayed overnight that night, is that correct?
Yes.
And if we go up here, higher on the sheet, we see among the guests who were there on this day, the 21st of February, you also had Asha Pryor, correct?
Yes.
And then Destin Tucker, correct?
Yes.
And then the Arvizo children, Gavin, Starr and Devellin?
Yes.
And it shows that the Arvizos were there from the night before, and they continued on to the next day without checking out, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then, of course, there are other people that are listed on the list. We won't go through each one. There are other guests there that day?
Yes.
Alright, there you go. May I approach to retrieve that?
Yes.
Now, we'll go to page 164, if I may. It's MJ00164. Show that. And that's for February 22, 2003. Is that correct?
Okay.
It's hard to read. Maybe counsel would agree that when you look at it closely it says the 22nd. If not, let me approach. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll tell you what.
I can't read it on mine.
Let's do this.
Is there a date on the top or just one on the bottom?
No, there's just one on the bottom. But let me show you that page. May I approach with that page? I'm going to show you page 00164, and ask you to take a look. Excuse me. Take a look at the date at the bottom, and see if you can tell the date from that.
I'll agree it's the 22nd.
Alright, thank you. And it would be in order, correct? There should be other pages pertaining to the 22nd in the book, correct?
Yes.
Alright, okay, so there's the date, and I'm putting 00164 back up on the screen. And do you see there is the entries for Gavin, Starr, Devellin in the guest information?
Yes.
Okay, Gavin, it shows, under, limo, POV, it shows, number 2. What does that represent to you?
To me that would represent he was staying in guest unit 2.
And it shows Starr Arvizo, ditto, is also in guest unit 2, is that correct?
Yes.
And they were both staying overnight. They had been there and they stayed over to the next time period, to the next 24-hour period, correct?
Correct.
If you look at Devellin, what does that say?
Upstairs viewing.
An upstairs viewing would be the room in, one of the rooms in the theater, is that correct?
Yes.
So that indicates that she was staying in the upstairs viewing part of the theater, is that correct?
Yes.
And if you look up at the third entry up there, you have Cassio, Marie Nicole, is that correct?
Yes.
And it shows that she was also staying in the upstairs viewing in the theater, is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, and she also stayed overnight, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and down at the bottom it shows Janet Arvizo, correct?
Correct.
And it shows number 4. Is that guest unit number 4?
Yes.
Now, is guest unit number 4 the guest unit that Elizabeth Taylor likes to stay in when she visits?
I have no idea.
Okay, is it a nice guest unit?
Yes.
And it shows Janet Arvizo was staying overnight. She had been there at midnight, and she was there at the next cutoff, which would be the next midnight. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, we'll go to MJ00166, and that's February 23, 03. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, on this date, we have the Arvizos shown again as staying at the ranch. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they were all staying. They had all been there and they were all staying overnight as guests again, correct?
Correct.
And Gavin and Starr are in Unit 2, is that right?
Yes.
Devellin's at the theater upstairs?
Yes.
And Janet is in Unit 4?
Yes.
Alright, and Marie Nicole Cassio is also in the theater upstairs, the same place as Devellin, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, it's possible for people at Neverland for guests at Neverland to request the services of staff people there, is that correct?
Yes.
And in a sense, it's almost like a hotel as far as service is concerned, is that right?
That's correct.
If somebody wants to call and have coffee brought to them or breakfast or anything, they can simply call and that will be done for them, is that correct?
Yes.
If somebody wants to call and have their laundry done, for instance, if they have laundry or cleaning that needs to be done, somebody would come and pick it up and take care of it for them, is that right?
That's correct.
If somebody wants to have a wake-up call, they can make a request for a wake-up call, is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm going to show 167 here, if I may. 167. By that I mean 00167, and the top is February 23, 03. And here this shows that a wake-up call is requested for Unit 4 at 7 o'clock in the morning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, let's skip ahead. I like to say that. It gives everybody a false sense of progress here. We are getting there. Skip ahead to 171, if I may. 00171 is February 24, 03, correct?
Correct.
Okay, now, there's a number of entries I'd like to focus on here. First of all, let's look at, Gavin and Star Arvizo were staying in Unit 2, correct?
Correct.
Devellin is again at the theater?
Correct.
Janet Arvizo is in Unit 4, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, now, it appears that the Arvizos were there overnight from the night before, correct?
Yes.
And then it appears that they all left at 1634 hours, which would be 4:34 in the afternoon, is that right?
Yes.
And then it appears that Gavin and Star and Janet came back at 2005, which would be 8:05 p.m., correct?
Correct.
And then they stayed overnight till the next day, right?
Correct.
And then Devellin came back at 1855, which would be 6:55, 5 minutes to 7 o'clock in the evening, correct?
Yes.
So it looks like they all left together, but Devellin came back a little earlier, and Janet, Star and Gavin stayed out and did something else and came back later, right?
Yes.
Alright, now, if we look down on this sheet, and by the way, do you know if Gavin and Star were taken to the dentist at some point?
I don't remember that.
Alright, this is not a day that you were particularly on duty, was it?
Which day?
This day, which is February 24, 03.
You'd have to show me the other log.
That would be 172. Let me put that up. This is 00172. And can you tell whether or not you were on duty that day?
No, not according to that.
I'm going to put 00171 back up. And let's see if we can figure this out. It looks like from the top that the whole Arvizo family left at 1634 hours. And then if you look down at the bottom, it says, employee vehicle, and the second entry shows, Vinny, Arvizo's 4, correct?
The second entry down?
Yes.
No, that would be on the first entry. Frank, Vinny.
Frank and Vinny. Okay, that's fair enough. That says, Frank and Vinny, Brown dually. Was there a, or some kind of dually? Is there a dually?
Yes, it's a brown dually.
Okay, and a dually, as most people know here, has got dual wheels in the back of the truck?
Correct.
It looks like they went out in a brown dually at 11:05 in the morning and got back at 3:11 in the afternoon, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the next entry, the one I was focusing on, and it seems to be cut off just a little bit there. The second one says, it looks like, Vinny, does it not? Or, INNIE, a little bit of a first letter got cut off.
Could I see your sheet?
You can see mine. Sure. If it's all right with the court. May I approach?
Yes.
It doesn't look like Vinny to me.
What does it look like?
Chris.
Oh, Chris. Okay. Anyway, you see, I'm going to move away, because I'm not supposed to talk up here, so I don't have to walk back and forth. You see where it says, Arvizo's 4?
Yes.
And whatever that says before, it might be, Chris, it might be anything, but whatever it is, after Arvizo's 4, it then says, Pontiac, right?
Yes.
So somebody took a Pontiac out. Was that a ranch vehicle?
I don't recall a Pontiac. It doesn't mean there wasn't one. I don't recall a Pontiac.
Do you remember Vinny was driving a Pontiac, if he brought a Pontiac to the ranch?
I have no idea.
Did Vinny at that time, do you recall Vinny having some kind of a vehicle that he brought to the ranch?
No, I don't recall his vehicle whatsoever.
Okay, you don't recall either way, whether he brought one or didn't bring one.
No.
Alright, in any event, somebody with 4 Arvizos took a Pontiac and left at 1634, correct?
Yes.
If we look up at the top, that's consistent with the checkout at the gate, 1634, of the family, is that correct?
Correct.
And then whoever that was with the Arvizos came back at 1855 hours, correct?
Yes.
If we look up at the top, it would appear that whoever came back with that vehicle brought Neverland back, is that correct?
Yes.
And so Janet and the boys remained out until 2005 hours, right?
Right.
And if we look at the next entry, we've got Joe Marcus, right?
Right.
Joe Marcus is the ranch manager, is that correct?
If he still is, he was at that time, I believe, yes.
That's fine. As of the time, he was the ranch manager, correct?
Yes, he was.
And do you know Joe?
Yes.
Is he a good guy, decent guy?
Yes.
Objection. Relevance.
Sustained.
Okay, you get along with Joe Marcus?
At times.
Alright, at times not, I gather. Alright.
Well, I did at the time.
You did at the time?
At the time, yes, I did.
And had Joe Marcus, to your knowledge, been at the ranch for a long time?
Very long.
In fact, his father had been the ranch manager for the prior owner, is that right?
Objection. Relevance.
Sustained.
Alright, now, it shows Joe Marcus took a gray van, is that right?
Yes.
And was the gray van one of the ranch vehicles?
Yes.
And it appears that he left at 1759 hours, which would be 1 minute to 6 o'clock in the evening, is that correct?
Correct.
And then came back at 2005 hours, is that right?
That's right.
And when you look at put 2 and 2 together here, the Arvizos, Janet and the 2 boys, came back at that time. It would appear that they came back with Joe Marcus, is that right?
Yes.
We'll go to 174. And 174, MJ00174, was from February the 25th, 2003. Is that correct?
Correct.
And here we see that the Arvizos, Gavin and Starr, stayed overnight, correct?
Yes.
And they were in Unit 2, is that right?
That's right.
And then Devellin and Janet were in Unit 4, is that correct?
Correct.
The Arvizos, all 4 of them, stayed overnight?
Yes.
And then they left at 7:25 in the morning.
Yes.
Is that correct? So at 7:25 on the morning of February 25th, they leave the ranch?
Yes.
And if you look down a little farther, it says, Vinny, who is apparently staying in the video library, he stayed overnight and he left at 7:25 in the morning?
Yes.
So it looks like Vinny and the Arvizos left together at that time, correct?
They left at the same time. If they left together, I don't know, but they definitely left at the same time.
Alright, now, let's go to 180. This will be 00180 that I'm putting up. And this skips ahead now to February the 27th, 0.03, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to direct your attention in this case to Frank Cassio.
Yes.
It appears that Frank Cassio returned to the ranch on February the 27th, 0.03, at 17:35 hours or 5:35 in the afternoon. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we'll go to 00181. 181, February 27th. This is another one of those sheets that pertains to the same day, is that correct?
Yes.
And at 1735 hours, the same time that was shown on the previous sheet, it shows that Jesus Solis cleared Frank Cassio to come on the property, is that correct?
Yes.
That's just further indication that Frank Cassio came back to the property at 17:35 hours on that day?
Yes.
Alright, and I'll put up 183. And this is 00183 on February the 28th, 0.03. And directing your attention to the third line down under Guest Information. It shows Frank Cassio, is that correct?
Yes.
So on February the 28th, it shows that he had been on the ranch from the previous day, and continued to stay on the ranch to the next day?
Yes.
Okay, Your Honor, I'm now, with the court's permission, going to go to Exhibit 335 and proceed in the same fashion. That's a couple hundred pages. So I'm going to pick out a few of those pages and make reference to the Bates stamp number, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Thank you. Just so we're oriented here, there's the court's exhibit number 335 that starts on page MJ00185, and the date on that page is March 1, 2003, correct?
Yes.
And that was not a leap year, so February had 28 days, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so the next day, from the last page we showed, would be 3 to 1, is that right?
Correct.
And in the back they're in these envelopes, back to back, here. I'm going to show you 186, which also says the 1st of March 03.
Yes.
And it looks like somebody's trying to give February 29th days there, but tried to correct it?
Looks that way.
And I want to focus your attention on the last line there of the guest information log where it says, Frank Tyson, and that means that Frank was staying at the video library, and he stayed overnight. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it didn't show that he checked out that day?
No, it doesn't.
Alright, I do see at the bottom, it says Chris took a gray van from 1:30 in the afternoon to 4:30. Is that an indication that Frank Tyson or Cassio went out with Chris?
Yes.
Okay, there was not another Frank there at the time, that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
But they came back, right?
Yes.
And so Frank, as far as you can tell, was an overnight visitor that night as well?
As far as it shows. Didn't show that he left. Doesn't show that he was carried over, so very possibly.
And then let's go to, okay, Your Honor, this is the exhibit as it exists from the way it was presented by the prosecution. This particular page does not have a Bates stamp number on the bottom. I'll show it to counsel. This does not have a Bates stamp number. It follows Bates stamp number 33673 and precedes Bates stamp number 33675.
I see that.
So I'm going to put that page up.
All right.
And I'm going to hope it focuses. There we go. Okay, so no Bates stamp number, but it does say 3 to 2. So that's March the 2nd, 2003, correct?
Yes.
And on March the 2nd, 2003, Frank Tyson, it shows, stayed overnight from the night before, correct?
Excuse me, correct.
And then it shows 16:30 that he left, is that right?
On that who left?
Frank Tyson. Am I not reading it correctly?
I'm sorry, I was, yes. 6.
Let's take our time here. I'm sorry if I confused you.
I apologize, I had to work last night.
You worked last night?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize, I'm sorry that you have to be here after doing that. Alright, we'll try to get you through this here. But take a look at it again, take your time. Looks like it says, A-N-K, Tyson.
Yes.
That's Frank Tyson, right?
Yes.
And where it says 3625, are those the phone?
Phone extensions.
And those phone extensions are where?
In the video library.
So it's another way of saying that's where he was.
Correct.
It shows he stays overnight and then it shows 16:30, it appears that he left, is that correct?
To me, it looks like 20 from here.
Alright, whatever it says, that would be the time that he left, according to this log, is that correct?
Correct.
And down at the bottom it says, Frank Tyson, again, and it shows, out. That means he took a ranch vehicle of some sort and left, is that right?
It should, if it was put there.
Alright, and that, I think, says 1305?
Yes.
So 1:05 in the afternoon. And then it shows, in, meaning he came back at 3:30 in the afternoon, right?
Yes.
Alright, and it looks like at 4:30 or 4:20, whatever that says, he may have left again, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, there's a star next to his name, and what does that mean?
Most likely that he came back and the person at the gate didn't record the time he came in.
Alright.
But if there was a star there, most likely whomever was at the gate knew that he was there.
That he came back on the property but they just didn't record the exact time?
They didn't record the exact time.
If you look up above that, we see what I think says, NNIE.
Yes.
And that shows that probably Vinny. Is that correct?
Probably.
Alright, arrived at 14:30 hours. It should be 2:30 in the afternoon.
Yes.
And that he left at 1630 hours, correct?
Yes.
And then there's a star, indicating he came back and somebody forgot to put it down?
Correct.
So if we put those two together, it looks like Frank Tyson and Vinny probably left at the same time, around 4:30 in the afternoon. Is that right?
Yes.
Alright, now, we also see that the Arvizo family came back, and we have Gavin, Star, and Develin, whose name is now recorded as Davida, or something, right?
Yes.
And Janet all came back at about 2:30, apparently with Vinny.
Yes.
Alright, I'm going to go to 033667, which is dated the 3rd of March 03, correct?
Correct.
And this shows that, excuse me 1 second, off-the-record discussion held at council table. This shows, just going down the list, on this particular date, which is the 3rd of March 03, Vinny was there, stayed overnight, and then he left at 10 minutes after noon. Is that correct?
Yes.
It doesn't show that he came back that day?
No.
Then you have Gavin, Star, Develia, and Janet Arvizo all staying overnight both from the night before until the next night, right?
Correct.
This shows both the extensions and the room numbers, or the unit numbers in some cases, right?
Yes.
So Gavin was staying in Unit 3, which is extension 20 on the phone. Is that right?
Correct.
Star was staying in Unit 4, which is extension 21. Is that correct?
Correct.
We'll skip one there and go to Janet Arvizo was staying in Unit 4, also at extension 21, also?
Yes.
Now, Develin was staying. First it said extension 3. I'm sorry, it said, Unit 3. That's scratched out and it says, extension 50. Is that correct?
Yes.
And extension 50 is out at the theater. Is that right?
Been a while. I know 48 is. So it could be, yes. I don't remember which one 50 was at.
But in any event, wherever 50 is, it's not one of the guest units?
No.
So it's someplace else on the ranch, right?
Yes.
And that shows that she was staying at whatever room was associated with extension 50. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, now, there are also, and throughout, we've been not commenting on everybody who was staying there, but if you look down at the bottom there, it says Rio and Simone.
Yes.
And you know who they are?
Yes.
Does it appear that Rio and Simone arrived at about 8 o'clock at night on the 3rd of March?
Yes.
And then they stayed overnight. Is that right?
Correct.
And who were Rio and Simone?
They are cousins, I believe, of Mr. Jackson.
Okay, and I'm going to go to 189. 00189, and that's for the 4th of March 03. Is that correct?
Correct.
And on the 4th of March 03, we have Gavin and Star up at the top, staying overnight?
Yes.
From overnight to overnight, there's no checkout time, correct?
Yes. Well, they were there overnight.
Yeah.
At least one night.
Alright, in other words, it doesn't show that they left. Usually you'd show carryover for out, but it just didn't show that, so you don't know. We'll look at the next day.
Yes.
Alright, the best way to do it. And look at the next day and see if they're still there, right?
That would be the best way.
In any event, they're at 20 and 21. So those are guest units, right?
Yes.
And then we have Develin, and she was staying at that extension 50, wherever that is, right?
Yes.
That's somewhere other than the guest units and it may be the theater?
I believe it's one of the rooms there's 2 bedrooms in the theater.
Alright, and the other bedroom in the theater is 51, is it not?
I believe so.
Alright, so it shows that she was there from overnight, is that right?
Yes.
And then it shows that she went out at 2:25 in the afternoon, right?
Yes.
And came back at 6:01 in the evening?
Yes.
And it appears, if we do some detective work there, down at the bottom, Chris Carter took the gray van out and apparently was the driver of the van, and drove her out at 14:25 and back at 18:01, the same times. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then Rio and Simone were also on the ranch. Is that correct?
Correct.
And it looks like they had been staying overnight, right?
Right.
And that they went out with Neverland driven by Chris Carter at 14:25 and came back at 18:01, at the same time. Is that right?
Yes.
And it looks like Rio was staying in the same room as Gavin. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, so that's 3 to 4, and now we're going to go to 191. Just for the record, Your Honor, it's not a big thing, but it's just a thing. As I'm paging through here, I'm seeing that these are a little bit out of order. It goes from 188 to 193 to 191 in the exhibit book. I don't know that there's any significance, but
It's the same in my copy.
That's fine. So we go to 191, and that shows for 3 to 5, March the 5th, 2003, correct?
Yes.
And here we show, once again, Gavin in 20, guest unit.
Yes.
Star, guest unit.
Yes.
Both they're from overnight, and no indication that they left. Is that correct?
Correct.
We have Neverland, and I'll persist in saying Neverland, even though it's spelled countless ways in these logs. Is that all right?
That's fine.
You knew eventually her name was Neverland, is that correct?
Yes.
So we have Neverland again at 50, which is apparently in the theater. Is that right?
Yes.
And she stayed overnight, or she had been staying overnight, and there's no indication she checked out. Is that right?
Correct.
And then you have Janet, who's staying in one of the guest units. Is that correct?
Yes.
And again, she was staying from overnight and there's no indication that she checked out, correct?
Correct.
And then you have Rio, who is apparently staying in the same guest unit as Gavin. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Rio was there from overnight, and on this date, March the 5th, it appears that both Rio and Simone left about 7:30 in the evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to 195. Showing MJ00195. That's for the 6th of March 03, is that correct?
Yes.
Here we show Janet Arvizo is now in Unit 4, which is extension 21, correct?
Correct.
And she had been staying overnight?
Yes.
And then we have Neverland, who's in Unit 3. She had been staying overnight, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, Gavin and Star are also shown in Unit 3, staying overnight. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'll put up MJ00198, which is for March the 7th, so once again the next day. And let's take the easy ones first. We have Gavin, Star and Neverland Arvizo. They show they're in Unit 3, which is extension number 20, right?
Yes.
And that they were there overnight, and they continued to remain overnight, correct?
Correct.
Then you have Janet Arvizo, who was logged in for Unit 4. It's crossed out. Do you have any idea why it was crossed out?
No.
And then there's a star and a star. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what does the star tend to mean?
Generally, it means there was no time given, written in, no time given written out, so it wasn't written out. The fact that it's crossed out can mean that she wasn't there. I don't know.
It shows she was there the day before?
Yes.
Alright, and then if we look here, we see that Frank and Vinny. It says, Vinny Black. That's the same Vinny. There was one Frank and one Vinny throughout this, right?
Yes.
So Frank and Vinny, if I may use the first names, are staying in the video library, and they were there at the beginning of the day, at midnight, and they were there at midnight the next.
Next day, yes.
Next day, right?
Yes.
Okay, now we go to 2001. 2001, I'm sorry. Too many numbers, sorry. 00201, which is 3 to 8 of .03, correct?
Correct.
The next day. And on that day, the logs show that we have Gavin, Star, and Neverland as well as Frank and Vinny all there the entire 24-hour period?
Correct.
So they didn't come. They didn't go. Alright, now we go to, oops. Again, these seem to be a little bit out of order. 204 comes before 203. But in any event, I'm going to put 204 up, which is the 9th of March '03. So that's the next day.
Yes.
And on this day we have Gavin, Star, Devellin, all there the entire time, correct?
Correct.
And then you have Frank and Vinny, who were there from the night before, and they seem to leave at about 3:43 in the afternoon, correct?
Correct.
And then they come back the two of them come back at the same time, at about 8:43 at night, correct?
Yes.
And then they stay overnight, is that right?
Yes.
We also on that day have other guests of course, but we have Rio and Simone arriving at 10 minutes after noon, correct?
Yes.
And then they stayed overnight?
Yes.
Now, may I approach the witness with the book?
Yes.
Let me put that page back first. Let me just say it out loud if I'm going to say it to the prosecutor. What I'm going to show the witness, keeping the pages in order and hoping not to trip and drop them all over the place. We have page 203 and then we have page 33,697. And then there's page 121, which is followed by page 33,698. And I want to ask the witness if that page, 121, belongs in the sequence here. And that's what I intended to approach him to do, if that's all right with the court. And that gives counsel an idea of why I'm doing it.
Sure.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, now, I'm not supposed to talk up here, but I just want to tell you this. Obviously these pages, we're going to keep them in the same order. It's just too hard to put them back in the binder as we went along. Here we have page 121 and I'm going to ask you if that belongs in that particular position, and I'm going to ask you to take a look towards the beginning of the book. And I'll try to give you a better indication, when I get back to my book, as to where that page may have come from.
Can I just interrupt? Off-the-record discussion held at council table.
I don't think this is the biggest thing in the world, but if you look at 121 that's in the book right there where you're looking at it.
Yes.
Does that appear to be in the correct sequence? Forget about the numbers at the bottom.
Right.
That will just confuse us for the moment.
This looks like one of the pages that we looked at yesterday.
In fact, if you look back to, hesitant to have you flip that because it might fall apart.
I'll do my best.
If you look back at exhibit 334, and now look at the bottom.
Any idea how far back that is?
334 is just, okay. May I approach again? It might be.
Yes. He's referring to an exhibit number, not the page numbers now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault. Okay, there's exhibit 334, and now, if I may, I'll just speak here briefly. If we look at the bottom, and you flip forward to 121, which is MJ00121, does that look like that's the same page?
Yes.
Alright, may I have the book back? Do you want to look at it, counsel? Okay, thank you, okay. And this is just the way the exhibit is, so we have to leave the exhibit the same way here. I'm now going to put this copy of 121 up on the board, just so we're all oriented. There's no date on it, is that correct?
Correct.
And you've gone back and you've seen. This is a second copy of a page we looked at yesterday, is that right?
That's right.
And that was really the page from February the 8th of 2003. Oops. Let me make sure I said that right. I'm sorry. February the 7th of 2003, correct, when CBS Entertainment was at the ranch with Ed Bradley and Jack Sussman, and so on?
I don't know from yesterday, but if that's the date that it says on the paper, then that's the day that it was from.
I will represent that's in between the pages for February the 7th in Exhibit 334.
Yes.
All right, okay, so that has nothing to do with the current sequence then, in March. All right?
Correct.
Now, on the...
Counsel?
Yeah.
Just for point of reference, it's between the 7th and the 9th. So it's not keyed to the 7th.
Counsel is saying it's between the 7th and the 9th. Suffice it to say it's in the book in February and we can let the exhibit speak for itself. It doesn't have a date on it. Is that all right, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, for this particular time period.
For a minute I thought the clock was going backwards. Laughter. Go ahead.
We'd like to start with February 7th, if we could, please.
All right.
And do it all over again.
No, we wouldn't.
No, we wouldn't. I think we all agree with that. We are almost through, which is always a terrible thing to hear from a lawyer. But I think it's true in this case. Alright, I'm going to show you now 033698. We're back on exhibit 335, okay? So we're going to put this up. Now, I will represent to you, and counsel can disagree if he wants. There does not appear to be the regular guest information page for.
Can't see it.
I know. It will focus in a moment. There does not appear to be the regular guest information page on March the 10th in this set where it lists who's staying at the ranch.
Okay.
I'll just represent that. And this, I'm hoping while I'm talking it's going to focus. There we go. Okay. But this appears to be one of the other pages for March the 10th, 2003. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can we take a break here?
Fine.